What the hell did you Frosties do in here? I told you to clean up all the dirt and weeds in this sector. You used the wrong Hydra spell, didn't you? Jeez. Alright. Hang on. Okay, when I initially thought of this one, I expected it to be short, like 2 or 3 shots levels of short. Obviously, that didn't happen. So, what was this about? What spawned the idea to make this? Well, it was inspired by the time I came home to find out that my old water heater had pulled a JonTron.
Well, that's about enough light for me for one day. Let me check the time. Yeah, it's about that time.
And the entryway was flooded. And did I mention, I was about to go out of town for a short while, right around the time this was happening. Yeah, that really put a damper on the whole short vacation thing, didn't it? And the water wasn't stopping either. I didn't know at first that it was the water heater because it looked like it was coming from the washing machine since it was pooling around there. But nope, it was the old water heater. Seriously, that thing was old, like mid-2000s old, way overdue for replacement. But several phone calls to multiple plumbers later, somebody came by and helped stop the flow of water. Unfortunately, it did get into the carpet. I'm just glad it hasn't turned into a moldy nightmare. Yet. Anyway, after it was all taken care of, I thought it'd be funny to animate a corridor in the archives flooding to poke fun at the situation. Life giving you lemons and all that, except that lemons are pain. You may laugh at my pain now, I do it every day. Anyway, I'll just take you through the process here because, well, it was a long one. Seriously, it would not shock me if I have 10 hours of footage of me working on this. Maybe I'll release in a time lapse if people would like that. So let's get started. So I knew after I had got this flooding situation resolved that I wanted to do something with a flooded corridor and have 2 Frosties and Observale there. The initial idea was they were all 3 going to be there and it was going to be silent and they would just stand there looking dumbfounded for a cut to a ball of water that is flooding the room constantly. This might sound simple, but here's the thing. Water in CG is hard. Kinda. Depending on what you're trying to do. Like, if you want a body of water in the background that doesn't need to interact with anything, then it could just be a reflective plane with a noisy bump map applied to it, and you just animate that moving, and it's pretty easy. You could probably do it in about 5 minutes. In the time it took me to say all that, you probably could have had to set up. But if you want the water to interact with things in the environment that it's in, that's where it's going to get more complicated. And where you move into the thing I was dreading. Fluid sims. Fluid simulations are exactly what they sound like. You simulate a fluid and it reacting to whatever you put in the scene. Sounds easy, right? Not really. they're expensive, both in time and data, because to make a complex sim that would look realistic, yeah, that's gonna eat up some terabytes. You know those water scenes in Godzilla Minus One? If you haven't seen that movie, go see it. It's goated in my opinion. Yeah, those water scenes, that was over 500 terabytes of data, and that's just the water alone. That's an entire SSD worth of data, which if you're even the slightest bit into computers, you know how expensive SSDs are. Thank you, AI. Of course, in the case of Godzilla Minus One, they're simulating something that needed to feel on par with the scale of an ocean. So a water sim for me wouldn't be too bad, right? Well, no. Because the other thing is, water sims need to be simulated and cached, so it's not trying to calculate itself every frame, which, at higher resolutions, to make it look like actual liquid, can take forever. I tried it once, and it took over 3 hours, I'm not kidding. Then, you have to actually render the liquid with a shader, and reflections are a thing. So, Blender has a ton to calculate for every single frame, especially if you make the water sim detailed, which you'd have to, for it to look slightly believable. So this is a long way of me saying that a water sim will take you a really long time, and you're gonna have to go through a lot of back and forth and tweaking if you want something that looks decent. And every time you change something, like for instance, you decide that an animation later doesn't look right, and you want to have the character step to the left, step to the right or whatever, guess what? You're gonna have to redo the sim. You know all that data you probably spent hours just baking? Yeah, go ahead and delete that, and then make whatever adjustments you need to make, and then bake it all again, and then hope that that is what you want, and you don't need to tweak it any further, because otherwise you're gonna have to repeat this step as necessary. If this sounds like a mess, it is, and I had to decide if I was gonna do that, or fake it with a texture. I quickly settled on doing it as a texture. The reason that was important to figure out just right out of the gate is because I was gonna determine how I was going to place the camera. Because of course, a block with a texture on it that looks like water isn't going to behave like a liquid and react to things that are moving in and out of it. Like, for example, feet or objects of any kind. So to not break the illusion here, I opted to not have objects moving through water and to not show Observable's feet. RIP feet, bros, if that's your thing. And yes, I am judging you.
You sick freak.
So, with that decided, I began placing the camera around and importing the models for the Frosties. I have a separate video on animation talking about the process that I went through with making them. That should be up in the card somewhere. The idea for this animation though, it began to change a little. I thought, wouldn't it be better if one of the Frosties had cast the wrong spell, and that started the flooding? And the other one, being his boss or something, wasn't shocked and chewing him out for it, and then have Observable show up. That idea stuck, which did make this longer and more complicated than I had intended, but I thought it would be worth it. As I kept planning, I thought, why not have there be a little back and forth, and that gave me the idea for the next thing I knew I needed, the spell books. Okay, so magic tomes. I could have kept this simple, and originally, I had planned to make 2 books out of a basic cube, with a leather texture on it for the covers, and paper texture for the inner part to make the pages, and then slap some basic symbol on the front and back to tell the audience what it is, without having to say it and call it a day. But why be boring? These are fantasy tomes, and the main wizard is a robot. Throw some sci-fi into there, right? Go big or go home. So I had the idea that the cover of the Hydromancy tome would have a screen built into it that played an animation to mirror waves. This was made by playing around with noises and gradients, and then animating the texture. I make it sound simple, but there was a lot of fine-tuning to try and get it to look right. I decided to make the main symbol on the book a glassy raindrop, and then I just repeated that across the book at different spots, and I threw some rings around them because rings are cool. Then I decided to add animated lights because the quick way to make something look sci-fi is to add random lights to it, even if it doesn't really make any sense. Because why would the spine of a book need to light up? Don't think about that too hard. Don't worry about it. Once I was happy with the model, I noticed I had spent way more time on this than I had intended, and I wasn't fond of the idea of making an open version and a new open and closed tome to be different. So the one Frosty who messed up, I just started calling him Wandy because he has a wand, and he would use this book to argue against the other one. Profound character naming aside, I made the process of making an open version of the book way easier than I thought. And I didn't even mean to. I guess we'll take a page out of Bob Ross's handy book and call it A Happy Accident. Because I had mirrored the cube making up the main body of the book, that meant I could duplicate it and then rotate the mirrored halves outward so the thing looked like it was an open book. Then I had to copy all the decorations on the covers and place them in a way that looked right. Took a while, but it was necessary. Then I had the idea that the rings in the book would glow and float away from the covers when opened, like something magical in it was activating. The other thing I wasn't sure about was how to do the pages on the open version. I thought about having the pages just be physical, but then I thought, why not make it so the text on the pages is projected out like a hologram? That would add to the sci-fi aesthetic, right? I then just needed a texture that would pass for written gibberish. I used a wave texture and manipulated it so the lines looked like writing. Then I used a noise texture to break them up so they weren't so uniform. Later on, I had the idea to animate the text shifting to kinda make it look like water, sort of. I just think it makes the book look more magical and otherworldly and weird, which is what I'm going for here. With that settled, I just needed a tome of flooding. I probably should have spent more time on it. I'm not 100% happy with it, or the weird wave symbol thing I tried to make for it. In hindsight, it might have been better to just try sculpting a wave on there instead. But I was getting tired and I had a lot more work to do, and I spent way more time on props than I intended to. Might go back and fix that later. Anyway, it's essentially a copy of the other book with some different textures and a different symbol. I tried to change the textures to make it look like rushing water. Again, I don't think it worked the greatest, but it was fine for what I needed since you barely see it anyway. I was able to make an open version the same way I did with the other one, but with that little side quest completed, I went back to the animations. Sorry to interrupt the video for a second, but I need to talk to you about something. So, in addition to running a YouTube channel, I'm also an author with 3 books out at the time of making this, and it would really mean a lot if you guys check them out on Amazon. Currently, I have the Renegade series, which has 2 books in it with a 3rd one in the works. It's a sci-fi action adventure story in the spirit of 90s cartoons and comics. The series follows a team of heroes, each with their own unique abilities, one of them being a sword-wielding, water-bending alien named Ronan. This group, called the Renegades, protect their world from all sorts of threats. The second book, Blackout, has a team following a lead on their arch nemesis, and they end up in their universe's version of Japan. The team find themselves in the crosshairs of a dangerous group of mercenaries and the shadowy group that hired them. As things escalate between them, the mercenaries, and the ones pulling their strings, the entire fate of the island hangs in the balance, as it is plunged into darkness and held hostage with the aid of a powerful weapon called Blackout. If you're looking for something less serious and more whimsical, consider checking out Tales of the Edgeworlds Volume 1. It's a collection of 4 zany, off-the-wall comedy stories set in a broken multiverse, and features characters such as a violent, short-tempered, foul-mouthed, gun-toting space penguin named Edgy, and his crew of oddballs getting into crazy hijinks, involving mutants, space mafias, and vampires, that are also from space. It also includes a story about a dorky, clumsy combat android named Mika 227 that tangles with a feared space pirate captain to save some miners. It also recently got an audiobook, which only amplifies the hilarity in these stories, and it really makes the characters jump off the page with the over-the-top voices that the narrator does. The link to my Amazon page for all 3 books will be in the description and in the pinned comment. Back to the video. Would anyone be shocked if I said animations ate up a lot of my time? Originally, I didn't plan to add any dialogue, so I had to make sure the Frosties conveyed that they were arguing without needing anything to be said. So the really mad one, let's just call him Angie for the rest of the video because it's funny. I decided that he should have his arms flailing about and he should be pointing aggressively at Wandy just to make him look like he was angry. I took some inspiration from that Ed, Edd n Eddy meme where Double D points a book at the camera. I didn't quite get it exact, but I wanted to try and catch some semblance of the spirit of it. So that's why he shows the book into the camera a few times. And you know what, looking back at this now, maybe I could have played this up more by having the camera get closer to the book, or having Angie more aggressively shove the book at the viewer. Man, hindsight's a bitch, ain't it? Moving on, to make Angie seem madder, also played around with the angle of the hat. Because when the hat was at a downward angle, it made them look mad, or sad, depending on what I did with the eyes. I focused on animating the characters first, and then the books. I was gonna try and make the books dissolve using some texture effect, because it's actually pretty easy to set up, but then I realized I'd have to add this dissolve effect to every texture on both books, and then animate each one. So I scrapped that and decided to have them just spawn in, and I used a glowing and shrinking orb of light to hide that. Keep it simple, right? I already have a lot going on here. After doing some passes on the animations for the Frosties, I was talking to a friend of mine and I was joking how the argument was basically the "can you read" bit from Madagascar. So then I thought, why don't I have Angie do that at some point? So I animated it in after Wandy shows which book he read from. The wrong book. Did some more passes on him too, and then I moved on to Observale. And again, hindsight being 2020 and all, his animations probably could have used another pass or two. There's a part I missed where some of the kinematics on his legs glitched out for like 2 or 3 frames. I'm not sure what happened there, but unfortunately I didn't notice it until the final render was done. For him, I knew he was going to have dialogue, so I went and recorded that first and then inserted it into the scene, so I could then animate him and sync with it and have the dialogue there as a reference. That actually helped me out a lot with figuring out what I wanted him to do. I thought it would be funnier if he came to the scene in a good mood, and then quickly realized something was up. Kind of like how I felt when I noticed my entryway was flooding. I was actually in a good mood before that. I really wanted him to show anger in how he moved, and I thought him pointing around the room at the Frosties in question would be both comical and convey his anger at the state of things. While messing around, I, for a second, parented the camera to his head, because I almost thought about trying to make the portal exit bit in first person. But then I had a better idea. One to save me some time in animating for the end, and make the part where he uses the spell seem a bit cooler. Have the end be in first person. Insert joke about an Observale first person game win. See, I beat you to it. But with that idea in my head, I decided to do it. And I've never done a first person animation like this, so it was a different experience. I had to keep some parts of his body in view a bit to sell the effect that this was a POV shot, so I decided to animate him facepalming and shaking his head. Might have done a little too much moving around for it. I hope I don't make anybody, nauseous with that. In my defense, it was a first attempt at doing this. I was gonna have a translucent version of his visor be in front of the camera to make it like a HUD, like something out of the Prime games or something. But when I tried to make that out of a glass texture, it kept reflecting all the particles that I had added coming out of the portal, and it made it impossible to see at points. So I scrapped it. I'll have to figure that out some other time. The main thing this saved me time on was animating Observale walking, since you don't see his feet. I just had him slide forward and had him do some bobbing movements, and I made him angle his staff to simulate him walking towards his minions. Now when it came to the spell, I was just going to have Observale create a bunch of glyphs and symbols around his hands that would glow and maybe rotate, and I'd make them glow brighter or spin faster, as if they were charging up a spell. But when I decided to switch it to first person, I wanted to punch it up more. Again, go big or go home. So I decided, what if Observale used a spell to create a miniature sun? I thought it would be both absurd and kinda cool. Way cooler than a basic fireball. So I whipped up a magic effect using some circles and triangles, and added a sphere, and textured it like a sun and animated that. I also wanted to create that, I think it's called a corona effect, around the sun. So what I did was I added in a ring and applied a gradient and then shaped it in a way so it kind of looked like a corona and it would taper off the further away it was from the sun. You can't really see it because of what I added a little bit later, unfortunately. I wanted his other hand to be doing something, so I decided that he should cast a protection spell around him and the Frosties for whenever that sun spell goes off. I was going to make the sun blue or white, but when I came up with the idea of what I wanted to do with the environment, I decided an orange sun would make it stand out more. I decided to cut the animation there with him just charging up the spells because, man, the amount of frames this ended up being was way more than I thought. Could have phoned it in by having a flash of white engulf the area, then hide the water and orb, but I think it's fine as is. Then I went back to making all the other effects and making sure all the books moved the way I wanted. There was one thing I failed to take into account though, and that's motion blur. Motion blur doesn't show up that well on playback in Blender. You really don't see it until you start rendering stuff. And it kind of messed with how I was showing and hiding the different books, and by the time I noticed it, I just spent about 3 days just rendering this. And I didn't want to spend another 3 days doing it again, so I just left it as is. I also started texturing the portal and figuring out what I wanted, and I thought about having it rotate from horizontal to vertical when it appears, and then doing the opposite when it disappears, just to make it more interesting. I kept the texture of that simple. I didn't need to show where he was coming from because, I mean, it wasn't important anyway, it didn't really matter. I slapped on some particles coming out of it just to make it clear that he's coming from somewhere. I also added some particles for the sun spell, made them look like embers, and I added some turbulence on them so that they were really moving and just being dynamic, and it just made the spell look more interesting. At least, I think so. I made a heat distortion using a refraction shader and a bump node and a noise texture and then animated that. And I probably should have made that a lot larger than I did, so the effect was more visible, because it kind of gets lost in there with the sun. Also, before I forget, I also added a distortion effect on the sun, so the orb isn't a perfect sphere all the time, but I don't think you can really notice it with how quickly the scene goes and ends, but it is what it is. I also added noise modifiers onto different bones for the character models at different times to make their animations more fluid, and in the case of Angie, to help emphasize how mad he is before the big "can you read" moment. Noise is a good way to get subtle movements out of your characters on parts you weren't animating. I think it makes them feel less like mannequins going through poses, and also it saves you the time of having to do idle animations yourself. Not to say that you couldn't do it, but, you know, noise helps with that. At this point, I was pretty far into things, and I decided I needed to focus on the water and the environment. When I started planning this, I didn't have an idea of what the environment was gonna look like. I just knew that it was supposed to be a temple hallway, and that was it. That's when I started just randomly looking for some music to listen to help me focus, and I stumbled on a video called Start Up 2000 System Menu Ambience PS2 Memory Bridge at Night. Whew. Long title aside, the animated image used on the video gave me an idea. What if the temple halls had some theming similar to a PS2? Greatest video game console of all time, and I will not hear any arguments to the contrary. But I will also say fuck Sony for getting rid of disc and just overall being anti-consumer and pushing all these live service games no one asked for and closing a bunch of studios that people actually like. But that's beyond the scope of this video. I had already done a kind of PS2 theming with the beach set I made before, which I probably should go back to and touch up some, because that had glowing orbs and glass cubes similar to the screen that you get when you don't put a disc in the PS2. So I decided to make the columns look somewhat like a PS2. Figuring that out helped me with the color scheme too. Cool colors with some greens and some reds thrown in. I played around with a number of columns because at first I thought I went overboard and added too many. I also had to redo the floor and ceilings because some of the topology, due to me manipulating them and not paying attention, ended up being awful and a nightmare to try and fix. I also added strips of light into the walls to make them more interesting. I even added some stones on the walls, roughly in the shape of PS2 memory cards. But in the final animation, you can't really see them, thanks to the lighting and the contrast, and I didn't catch it till it was too late, so it is what it is. I had the idea of one point to add lights on the floor, but after messing around with it, I decided to just leave the floor plain. And since with the lighting of the room already, you wouldn't see much of the floor anyway, since of the way the water shader worked, and the render would just likely take even longer, because it would have to calculate the light paths for the lights cutting through the volumes of water, so I just scrapped it. But I did spend a lot of time on the stone textures because they kept coming out looking more like plastic than stone. And I also spent a lot of time on the lighting, and this might be the bluest hallway ever. I would play that song Blue, but I'm not trying to get a copyright claim. If there's an award for bluest hallway ever, I think I'm a shoo-in for winning that this year. For the water, I had already made a good water texture and I'd saved it to my own asset library, which I really need to do more with that. But when it came to the water, I wanted it to feel more dynamic and not just a animated texture that's just, rising up and imitating waves to manipulating the bump. So I decided to try using dynamic paint and making the column of water coming out of the orb the brush, so the water cube would deform and react to that. When I did this, the water looked like it was flowing into the room and spreading out from the source, which is exactly what I was hoping for. And doing that, I think, helped a lot. I still probably could have done more, like have some effects for where the pillars and columns touches the cube of water to make it look like it was splashing against it. But with where I put the camera, you couldn't really see it anyway, so it's fine. But after getting the environment figured out in the water, I kept playing around with the lighting, and then after that, I was ready for this thing to render. I am not exaggerating when I say this. It took about 3 days to render. I did pause it at points to be fair to give my PC a break and because there were other things I wanted to do, like gaming. But yeah, About 3 days. It being in 4K was an accident. You see, I was taking a 4K screenshot, and I forgot to set the resolution back to 1080p before pressing render on the full thing. Oh well, you can enjoy this in gorgeous 4K if your internet can handle it, even though I'm pretty sure YouTube compression is gonna butcher that. But with the render done, I had to work on sound design. After staring at the animation with no sound but Obsville's dialogue for a really long time, I thought the Frosties needed to talk to help fill in the silence. So I had to come up with voices. I wrote some dialogue that made sense, recorded 2 goofy voices, and then I went in, pitched and sped up the voices, and then reversed it, and then unreversed parts of it, and then I duplicated the tracks and changed the pitches on those to create a robotic sound. I also added some phasers to the voices and some distortions, so it really sounded alien and like they were speaking another language. Balancing the sound was a bit of work because the raw experts really? The raw exports were loud to the point of being grating. But as I was adding more sounds on top of it, it started to get drowned out, so I had to go back and forth with that. I also had to try and make it sound like these were 2 completely different, I guess we'll call them people talking, and I had to manipulate it in a way where you could tell who was talking. And the way I did that was by panning them to the left for Angie and panning the dialogue to the right for Wandy. With their voices settled, I just needed to add more sound. I needed some sort of ambience, so I started manipulating some noise and then a synth note in Audacity, and I turned that into some droning ambience, and I somehow made 4 hours of pure nightmare fuel by slowing both of those things down by 800%. Seriously, I think I accidentally made some good horror chase music here. I'm gonna play like a minute of it. I recommend listening to this with good surround sound. Yeah, not quite what I was going for with this animation, especially with that synth note. It sounds almost like there's a voice in there or something, which is creepy as shit. But imagine you're playing a horror game and you start hearing that when a monster sees you, and it gets louder to you the closer it gets. You know what? That's a good idea. Let me write that down. Hold on a second. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Good news. When turned way the hell down, it's good background noises. And when I say background noises, I mean noise that's there, but you're probably not going to notice it. I did try my hand in making some other sound effects myself, but that really wasn't working, so it was back to the great people over at freesound.org. I'm not sponsored, but it's a great site if you need like sound effects. No bullshit aside, I'm not trying to sell you on it. Just genuinely. Found some great stuff I could use with proper credits, all of which will be in the description of this video. Also, fun fact, because I just think it's kind of funny, I added some sounds from an old DVD player that someone had uploaded to the website as robot noises for Observale. The Sunspell was 2 gas burners igniting and played over each other at different times, and one of them was pitch shifted down a little bit. Again, that was also from Freesound. I ended up doing several passes, adjusting and raising and lowering sounds to get everything to kind of sound right. I don't know if there's an exact science to this, I just played it by ear.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Okay, I'll get out. I added some lens damage and grain over the entire animation, and then some heat distortion effects when he starts charging up the Sunspell, and I did all this in my editing software. I did think about adding this one built-in effect for glass with water on it, like water droplets, for the scenes when the camera's underwater, but the built-in effect in the editing software, it also applies some distortion to the final image, and there's not an easy way to have that gradually fade out, so I had to scrap it. I did put some camera shake, which was something I meant to add to the cameras in Blender, but I genuinely forgot about it. So yeah, that was a little behind the scenes stuff for this animation. I might make a third one because, believe it or not, after I got back from that vacation and the water heater was fixed, my internet decided it wanted to die on me too. for like 3 days. Not sure how I tackled turning that one into something funny, but I might give it a shot. Who knows? But seriously though, I do need to get to work on that Vital Shell game review I mentioned in a community post a while ago. And I also need to go back to working on the Doom retrospective. And I think I might have to split Final Doom into 2 videos. Not sure about that yet. Also, I now have a Twitter. I post renders there too and other stuff pertaining to my books. Link in the description for that. But let me know what you guys think of this animation and this video style. Would you rather I separate the behind the scenes stuff and commentary as its own video, or keep it as all one thing? You guys can let me know in the comments. And also, let me know if you'd want to see the time lapse of me making this stuff. And please consider leaving a like, commenting, and sharing the video and subbing. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you for continuing to watch and commenting and all that stuff. And if you're new here, obviously consider subbing. Not to toot my own horn, I think I make some cool shit here. We're getting close to 100 subs on here, so I should probably start planning something cool for that. Also check out my books. They're pretty fun. Totally not biased here. But thank you all and have a good one.